What's up, everybody? Big Herc 916, getting down with Fresh Out. You know how we do it over here. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. And man, we got a special guest for you here today. I'm here with my man, Corcoran, referred by another good friend, the homie Tank. And man, this is a special interview in the making. Ty, man, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks
for coming, man. I'm glad we connected. Your life experience, man, is amazing. And for those out there, when they hear your story, I hope they're inspired. But kind of break down for our viewers where you're from and how you grew up, man.
Yeah, so I was born in Los Osos, California, which is up by San Luis Obispo. At that time, it was like a blue-collar working town right on the beach. My dad worked for the city dump, and when I was probably around 3, we ended up moving down to Lancaster, Palmdale area. And then I spent all of my formative years right there until I was probably about 17 and was incarcerated.
So what led up to your incarceration?
Well, I mean, many different things. There's the choices that I made, right? Obviously, I ran away when I was 14, got involved with gangs, got involved with violence. I was an angry and really depressed kid. I had a lot of unresolved issues. I was hurt, and a lot of that manifested in me kind of just making these terrible choices in my life. The other part about it too was just kind of like where I come from. My home was dysfunctional. My parents, they split apart when I was really young, and my mom was neglectful to the point of like kind of being abusive. She just really didn't pay attention to my brothers and sister and I, and how we felt about things. And then my dad was extremely responsible, right? He was like about school and chores and trying to help us develop life skills to be, functioning and healthy people later into our adult life. But the clash between the two was hard for me to kind of handle. And so by the time I was 14, I decided that I was going to run away from home and that I was going to go make my life better. And so I took off, and I was homeless, skateboarding around town, sleeping in abandoned cars, sleeping in abandoned houses. And I fell in with a local crew out in Lancaster of other kids that were kind of like me. They were also just angry and hurt and looking to lash out at the world around them. And yeah.
That's the connection with the skateboarding, because skateboarding was always like, for me, my outlet. I wanted to have the kid be a professional skater, like Thrasher,
so did I.
Trans World was like my thing.
Yeah.
And skateboarding, you're kind of like it's kind of like an outcast kind of crew.
It is.
Because you were doing stuff, don't skate here, don't do this. You're
totally
grinding shit, tearing up stuff, man. And you got to be kind of different to hang out with that, because, you're wearing, like I'm wearing Jimmy Z's and sometimes listening to Agent Orange or Suicidal Tendencies. And I was not like a black kid. I felt like it was hard. You know what I mean? Because I do that after school, but during school, like kids didn't know I skateboarded, So it's kind of a weird thing, but it's funny you said that, man, because those kids were kind of like, you didn't really do a lot, but you kind of caused a little mischief, to kind of run around and stuff. But that was probably my first really involvement with a crew of young people with a commonality, and you're all just trying to find your identity.
Yeah, I mean, skateboarding was also one of the, I'll put it as a sport, right? It was a sport that didn't need for your parents to be there, right?
Yeah.
Didn't need for really adults to be there. And it wasn't a team sport, even though it was a crew, right? Even though a lot of us, we were together and we would go skateboarding, but it wasn't necessarily that you were a part of a team. Before that, I played organized sports. I played soccer and hockey and things like that. But as my home life was deteriorating, I didn't want to be around my parents, and I didn't want to be around adults in that type of way. And I wanted to be around other kids that I felt like were like me. And so skateboarding came into my life because of that. It was the punk rock, rebellious side of things. And as punk rock started to phase out, hip hop started to come in. And hip hop and rap really like integrated itself into the skate culture.
It's crazy too, not to cut you off, but skateboarding was my first street validation. could you pull off a trick? Oh, Todd,
Yeah,
man,
yeah.
that's, you know what I mean?
Right,
like,
right,
oh,
right.
you did the ho-ho,
Yeah.
you did an ollie kickflip, you
Yeah.
did Japan. So that was when I feel like you're like you said, it wasn't your parents, it was your homies.
That's true.
Oh man, you're sick. Do that one trick, man.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
ollie wall ride, or what
And
do you
if
know
you
what I
had
mean?
style, or
Yeah.
if you did the crazier stuff,
yeah,
right? Like, you know,
yeah.
it wasn't just enough to be able to, like, maybe for example, go down some stairs, right? You want to climb up on a roof and then, you know, ollie off the roof and like do those types of things.
Yeah, that was like my first really validation. And, you know, just like you said, from that, and it led to like, you know, the hip hop, and when I was around like the drug era. So it's like I went from that to trying to validate myself on the streets with the drug, you know, trying to like, oh, okay, now I can, you know, go from skateboarding to maybe wearing Fila's and being the fly guy with a gold chain. You know, I mean, that stupid stuff, man, I got involved in, but it's funny. A lot of similarities, man. Yeah,
and I think like acceptance is such a big part of it, right? A lot of us that were coming from troubled past or troubled behavior was really a cry for acceptance.
You're right.
And for me, I wanted acceptance from my parents, right? And like when I think about it on a deeper level, I internalized a lot of what they were arguing about and what they were going through and how their marriage was falling apart as like my fault, right? And later on in life, I was able to understand that it wasn't, as I started to work through some of the character kind of defects that I had developed from that. But it does. A lot of it boils down to acceptance. And when we start to receive that, or at least the way that I did in skateboarding or in the street culture or whatever, it was like fuel to me. You know, when somebody would like give me attention in that type of way and be like, oh man, this dude is down or this and that. Especially when I started gang banging, you know, and being the only white boy from my gang, it was like, it made me feel special in a certain type of way. And that just kind of like reinforces that need for acceptance that goes back to my childhood.
So how was that though? I mean, because, you know, I grew up, there was maybe one white guy in my neighborhood who was kind of like representing, and he was like the only white guy like banging like that. So he had to be like extra like, because everybody was like, oh man, who's this dude? And he let it know, like, just because I'm white, I'm not soft. He had to like actually had that edge, and he kind of built a reputation around that. Did you feel like you had to go like the extra mile to prove yourself? Because certain dudes thought, oh, this guy's just trying to like be cool and he's not really about that life.
Yeah, sometimes I did. I felt like that I had to prove myself. I don't know if that's how everybody feels, but I know I felt that pressure.
Yeah.
I felt the pressure to prove myself, and that that there was more eyes on me because of my race, or because of being white. But also too, you know, it was like I thrived on it. You know, part of it was that I wanted to stand out. And I wanted to be able to be seen in that type of way, and to be seen as something that was like a notch above in some type of way. So for me, I even looked for opportunities to be able to prove myself. It wasn't always somebody putting that pressure on me. Sometimes it was me looking for the opportunity to stand out into the spotlight and be able to show that I was really about this, you know, at that time in my life.
Now, how old were you when the first time you got locked up?
I was 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was that juvenile hall?
Yeah, it was juvenile hall. So let me take that back. I was 16, and I went and did like 2 days down in the juvenile hall before I was kicked back out with a DA reject, right, for a grand theft auto. And then probably only like 6 months later or a few months later is when I got cracked for the case that I ended up getting life in prison for.
Damn.
And I went right to juvenile hall, was tried as an adult, and then sentenced to the equivalent of life without in state.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
So what was that charge?
Well, it started out as an attempted armed robbery, and then when I wouldn't cooperate with the district attorney and things like that, they amended it to kidnap for robbery. That carries a mandatory minimum 7 to life with a 10-year gun enhancement. They gave me a different count for everybody in the building, and then ran it all bow-legged.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
So they were really trying to squeeze you to tell.
Yeah, they wanted the guys that I was with, the crew that I was a part of, and it was all dudes from Raymond, from my neighborhood and stuff. But they were all the older homies, you know. One of them was in his 40s.
Damn.
And so I always was like trying to run with the older crowd in a lot of ways, and then I was the only one that got cracked on the case. And when I did, the district attorney and them really tried to put the pressure on me to tell who I was with.
Did they make it a big issue because of the age discrepancy? Like they felt like these guys had kind of put you in a situation, or did they try to make it seem like
Mm-hmm.
were somehow being exploited in the situation?
They never said that.
Okay.
I just remember them being angry that I wasn't accepting any responsibility. Like not only did I not know who, not only was I not going to tell on the guys that I was with, but I also was like, I didn't do it, they didn't do it, nobody, I don't know who did it type of thing, know?
Oh yeah.
And so I just remember them being like, that's the way you want to play this. Okay, cool, then we'll play it like that.
Yeah.
And it took me years later to understand that really they were putting the pressure on me to try to get the guys that I was with, because those were the guys that were really like under investigation. There was deeper shit that was going on with them. But I think also a lot of it had to do with race. I think in my hometown of Lancaster, it was still at that time a very like cowboy court, very racially motivated out there. You had, a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan had a history out there. And so for me, I think they were really angry about this white local kid who's hanging out with all these black dudes from the city, from Los Angeles, and how the town felt like so many people were coming out from the inner city were bringing those things out here. They were bringing the elements out to the small town.
Yeah.
And that they were going to use an example of me for also all of the other locals that were in the town.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny to me though, and it's hypocritical because they looked at it like people bringing that out to the small town, but Lancaster's always been very like, it was like the meth capital of the country for a while, right? They had trailer parks, skinheads, Ku Klux Klan, lots of violence. It's like, what are people bringing out?
Yeah,
it's already here.
Yeah,
that's
one of the things. Like when you look at, until things like cross over and they feel like, oh man, like it was cool for all the gangbanging music and all that stuff when it was just in the urban. And then when you had kids like, the white dude in the Midwest talking about, oh, this is cuz, this is Crip. And they're like, oh, hold on, little Billy, no cripping. We got to shut this shit down. You know what I mean? And then it became an issue. But when it was just like all blacks and stuff, because, as I went through the system and I'm seeing like in Sacramento, white dudes that are bloods, and I'm like, damn, and this dude, he's like, oh, man, it's like my third dope case. I'm like, God damn, you keep getting out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They let you out because they feel like you're, a victim. Yeah. But I'm up in here fucking my second dope case. I got to go do, damn near a year in juvenile hall. You know what I mean? So it was a different perspective. And I didn't really put it together. And so I started like, oh, man, you got to play the game smarter. The game is duped. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. And also too, there, I feel like, you hear a lot about like white privilege, right? And what that kind of provides for white people in America. And there's definitely a certain layer to that, but I didn't experience it. I got thrown the book, man, and I got sentenced to more time than Charles Manson did, right? Where nobody was physically hurt in my crime. And I used to watch a lot of guys come in from CCB, LAX, which is like the courts from the inner city. And they would have way harder crimes and they would get way less time, right? And I was always I just never figured it out. I'm like, man, why is it that I'm getting railroaded in this type of way? And so I think like, I don't know where I was going with that, but other than just to say that sometimes what you think is privileged, right, isn't always privileged in this circle.
Well, too, just looking at that from an outside perspective, they want to show like, in say like white culture that like if you don't play our game, we can show you we're gonna play.
That's
true. What I mean? Like you want to play that game. You don't want to play with us.
I'm gonna show you how we do it.
I'm showing you how we do it.
Right.
Like how we did that guy. No, we're gonna do 10 times because you're gonna learn. Like we run this.
Yeah, totally.
And it's kind of like it's a slap in the face, but it's also like like you said, it has nothing to do necessarily with white privilege because we're going to set an example, and that way everybody else behind you is going to fall back in line.
Yeah. And
you guys will learn how to play the game. So it's a lot of I think paradoxes in like the system, and then as you get into the system, and if you have any sense of like core values, morals that you were brought up with, as you enter into the system, you start looking at things differently, and hopefully that's your redeeming factors when you talk about rehabilitating, because you're not really, the system's not going to rehabilitate you. You're going to have something inside of you, maybe that was taught, that somehow emerges as you sit there and have these reflection points that gives you like, wow, okay, man, I need to, this is not for me.
Yeah, I think our core values and our principles are our compass in life, right? It's our compass on how we make decisions. And so, you're right in that happened for me. For me, when I was, after all the dust settled, appeals were over, right? Gang banging had lost its kind of like allure, right? I didn't see it in the same way. I was doing long stretches in the hole, over my affiliations and the politics behind what was going on with me and stuff. And it was funny because I used to lay back, look at pictures, and daydream about being with the homies, right? But as that was going on, I didn't find any comfort in that. And instead, I went way further back in my life. And I thought about my times as a kid, way out in the desert, like exploring after animals and using my imagination and some of my favorite books, and like all of these different experiences that would literally feel like a warm blanket over my heart while I was in the hole by myself going through all of these very hard times. And that was the core values, right? The core values were resurfacing in this way. And I was looking for a lifeline to hold on to try to be able to say, man, I need something to be able to guide me through what I'm doing right now, because I feel so lost. I think that's why it's really important for people to also ask themselves, what do you believe in? What are your principles? What are your core values, right? And they're not set in stone. It's not something that I feel like just because maybe your childhood, maybe you didn't get those core values, you can choose these things, right? It becomes a choice. And that's the thing that's going to help you when you're starting to navigate through hard times in your life and when you're dealing with those tougher emotions.
Was there anybody in prison that you kind of turned to, or somebody who kind of like took you under their wing that kind of gave you an inspiration or direction? Because I know for me, like, there was an older guy, two older guys, one white, one black, and they seen some potential in me. And when I talked to these guys, it almost was like talking to almost either an uncle or father figure. And it called me out of my shit. A lot of the things I thought, I'm like, I would go back in the cell and be like, damn, dude, he was right. Because your ego don't want you to say he's right front of him while you're walking the track. But when you go back and you lay in the bunk and you're sitting there in this fucking, like, dude, man, you're hearing all the crazy shit, you're like, damn, that conversation was real, man, and that was some real shit.
Yeah, so I had there's a few guys along the way, but the one that really, the first one and the one that was probably the most impactful was this guy named Hap Miller out of San Bernardino, and he was this old biker. And after I had dropped out and left the gangs and all of that, and I was setting out into this unknown territory, I got sailed up with him shortly after landing on the yard. And he was a guy that had a lot of respect. He'd been in the system for years. Everybody knew him. He was a dangerous guy, right? He could fight really well. He was amazing at boxing and stuff. And so I looked up to him in a lot of different ways. And I remember I was on my bunk one day and he asked me, he goes, yo, man, what do you do? And I'm like, well, what do you mean, what do I do? He goes, well, what do you do with your time? What do you do with your life? And I go, watch TV, work out, read. And he's like, that's cool. He's like, but how do you take care of yourself? And I'm like, well, my family sometimes sends me money for packages or for canteen and that type of thing. And he's like, that's good. I'm happy you got a family like that. He goes, but no disrespect, and I hope things change for you, but as of right now, you have life in prison, right? And it's a very real possibility that you will spend the rest of your life in here. And as the years go by and you get older, your family gets older too. And sometimes people pass away. Sometimes people, like your brothers, maybe they'll have kids and start their own families and they move. And you can't always depend on somebody else to take care of you in that type of way. And he said, if you want, I can teach you how to draw. And in prison, cards and drawing will always be able to provide you the necessities and the essentials. You'll always be able to get your cosmetics and you'll be able to throw some food on the shelf, right? And be able to take care of yourself. And for me, it was life-changing, it was transformative at that time, because I was just leaving this identity of being a Crip. And I was so sick of it. I was so sick of being the white Crip. Everywhere I went, I landed on a yard and this and that and da-da-da, and I just was like tired of just being labeled in that type of way. But I didn't know who I was now. You know, I'm like, but who am I? If you strip that away, I got to go back a lot of years. Not even that I had been gangbanging that long, right? At this time, I was in my early 20s. But the thing was that was my rebellious personality, and my rebellious identity was something that I had from a very early age. So it was like, who am I without that, right? And I had never had a job. I had never, any of these types of things. Even in the joint, I hadn't had a job yet, because this was at the time when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, and so like vocations had been shut down a lot, funding had been cut. There was very few jobs on the yard, and those went to the dudes that were the regs, you know, the guys that had clout and seniority, unless you got put in education or something. So when he told me he would teach me how to draw, I didn't realize that it was going to unlock an aspect of myself that was really important for me to identify, which was being creative, right? I didn't know I was an artist. I didn't know that I had this strong work ethic that was like waiting to be exercised and utilized in some type of way. But he went on to so many other things. I remember early on when one time it was his birthday, and I was gonna go buy some weed on the yard, right? To, you know, we're gonna smoke a cap of weed and like hang out and do all this type of stuff. And so I go and I pay these guys. And these guys decide they're not going to give me the weed, right? They take my money. Yeah, we're going to, visiting's coming up. We'll get you this on this day, right? This weekend or whatever. And that weekend went by. The next weekend went by. And so I started to feel played, right? And so I went out to the yard and I confronted these guys on the handball court, right? They were out there playing handball and stuff. And one thing that I had never been was a punk. So I walk up to the handball court as they're playing, and dude hits the handball, and I grab the handball in play, and I throw it over the wall, boom, right? And I look at the dudes on the handball court, and I'm like, yo, listen, man, you've been telling me that this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. I want either my money or I want my weed, or I'm going to tear this motherfucker up. So obviously this causes a big thing, right? There's like all type of tension going on. Hap sees it from across the yard as it's going on. So here comes Hap. It probably saved me in the situation, right? Hap comes across the yard, and a couple of his buddies come across the yard, and now there's this tense standoff on the handball court. And make a long story short, nothing happens, and they end up giving me my money back, right? But when we got back to the cell, Hap turns around and he's angry at me, right? And I thought, oh, I went over there and I stood up for myself, so you're going to be proud of who I am because I did that, right? But Hap said, man, basically like, what the fuck are you doing? You're going out here and you think I don't got love for you, putting me at risk. You're putting the people that have respect for me also at risk. You're putting yourself at risk, and you could lose everything, all because you wanted to get some weed for me for my birthday. It's like, if you think about it, if you had never been out there trying to buy some weed, none of us would have been in this situation that could have gone a completely different way. And things like that, I hadn't had happen before to me, right? The majority of the time, people pat me on the back for being crazy enough to go do something like that, right? Or they fuel me on pump me up by being like, that's right, man, they saw who you were and blah, 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 and all these different things. But now I had this older guy who was like, you need to think more about your decisions. Don't be impulsive. Have fortitude. Think about how this can impact you. Think how it can impact the people around you, and so forth. And yeah, man, he changed my life in so many different ways because of those types of things.